Tompkins Square Park. I see a lot of people here in the beginning. Most people were not. We were here. And guess what? We're still here anyway. Rock and roll forever. We have next band right now. Who's fucking pop? Our fucking pop. Who's fucking pop? Our fucking pop. Who's fucking pop? Our fucking pop. Who's fucking pop? Our fucking pop.
That was David Peel in the Lower East Side. Coming up, yay! Yay, David Peel! Yay! Let's hear it for David Peel! Everybody applaud for David Peel! David fucking Peel! Up against the wall, motherfuckers! Coming up next is a very talented Roosevelt Salavi. Coming up right now. By the way, we have a table here with interesting literature, the latest issue of The Shadow. Our lady of Perpetual PMS has a little tip box. If you can donate something, it'll be very helpful. David Peel has CDs available for sale here if you want to buy a David Peel compilation. Next speaker is Frank Morales, Lower East Side activist, longtime squatter, housing activist. Franken.
Okay, we're going to say just a minute or so here. Welcome everyone and happy commemoration of the 1988 Tompkins Square Park riot, which was really a festival of liberation and confrontation with gentrification. And we're still fighting that gentrification now. We got to just band together, all the people, you know, the newcomers and the old-timers and all the rest, everybody band together and freeze the moment, because these guys don't stop. They keep coming. You know, it's like you get to a stasis, a place where you feel comfortable as a community and so forth. They don't care. They keep coming. They keep coming. So nobody's safe. It doesn't matter if you can afford X amount of money or whatever. Nobody's safe. So everybody's got to band together. All right? Everybody who's here right now, and we got to stop the ongoing speculation that takes place in this neighborhood, right? We got to freeze it. We got to freeze it so that we can have time and space to create our own spaces of liberation and joy and freedom and so forth and so on. So that's what I'd like to say. I'd like to say, yeah, happy anniversary. It's good to see everybody here and the good vibe, and, you know, death to boredom and all that other.
So we're talking about this from a very, very strong foundation that we have developed over a number of different areas with a number of different people. And Rod is just one of the key witnesses here, because he has done probably one of the best jobs that I've ever seen of being able to absolutely hold these people accountable by exposing the problems that he's run into just in these various court cases. And, of course, Rod is one of the first ones who absolutely exposed the idea that these public officials are not. They're corporations posing as our government. And I'm sure a lot of these listeners are pretty familiar with all of that. But if you're not, then as you can go back and listen to some of these broadcasts or get more knowledgeable about what we're doing, if you have any questions that we're not dealing with the corporations posing as government, who have imposed themselves into our government. Well, that's what this investigation is about, is being able to bring that out in such a way that people are going to have to say, oh, my God, and not be able to run away from it anymore. We just simply have to follow the evidence trail and realize that, you know, this is where we are in the world, in the United States of America, you know, in all of the countries we're dealing with this. And so what are we, each one, going to be able to do? How are we going to help our children and our grandchildren going forward? So that's kind of what we're doing here as far as really looking at the evidence and everything that we're pulling together to start holding everybody accountable for the lack of following the rule of law.
Well, this is it. Now, this is what we really have come back in and hammered on. Because, ladies and gentlemen, there's one thing that I have learned, and Dwight and I both have done this. We do not know how to defend ourselves in a courtroom. We don't know the first thing on defending ourselves. Because in order to defend yourself, you have to go in and make excuses for their corruption to justify railroading you. All right? I'm not capable of coming in and justifying, well, Your Honor, I'm sorry I was doing 35 and a 25, and I want to apologize here. the fact that you don't have an oath of office, the fact that you don't have a bond, the fact that you don't hold public office, the fact that you're failing to disclose that you're operating under the Trading with the Enemy Act, the fact that you fail to disclose that you're operating under the International Organization Immunities Act, you don't hold public office here, has nothing to do that I did 35 and a 25. You have to hold proper office before you talk to me. So I'm not in here to make excuses. I'm in here to point out that you don't have jurisdiction. You have to do your job right first before you can talk to me. You can't commit a felony against my misdemeanor. You can't create an act of treason while you're trying to charge me when you don't have a plaintiff and didn't file a proper complaint, didn't have an oath, didn't have a warrant signed by the judge, and you're dragging me off the street. Let's talk about your errors before you even address me. So this is what I'm sitting here saying. I have never learned how to make excuses and to defend myself when it's so much easier to point out their corruption. And this is how I've always operated. If you go back and check any of my paperwork out, all my paperwork exposes their corruption. The original document that I did in 2008, the Corn Novus paperwork, was a 4-page document. And I laid it out, and a student that was listening to AIB radio on TalkShoe took the paperwork and took it to his college professor. I got a phone call because this college professor said, "Where did you get this?" He said, "Well, I got off this guy in North Carolina." So they called me. We talked for about 2 hours. This college professor proceeded to explain to me and asked me about that Corn Novus paperwork. And I started laying out the entire fraud because under Civil Rules Procedure Rule 4, under foreign sovereign immunity, if we want to sue the political subdivision, you want to sue the police officer, you want to sue the mayor, you want to sue the government, you have to sue them under foreign sovereign immunity. And that's how they come under Rule 4. You got to go through the Department of State in order to sue them. You got to get their permission to sue them. Well, wait a minute. Let's do reverse psychology here a minute. If I have to go through all this to sue them, then reverse psychology says they got to go through all this to drag my butt into court. And they're not doing it. Well, we laid out the expatriation side that we did not expatriate, and we brought in the foreign sovereign immunity side that they had to go through the Department of State. And then we sit here and explained that they gave up their national citizenship when they took their oath of office. This college professor says, "My God, Mr. Klaus," he says, "you realize what you've done?" I says, "Yeah." He says, "Do you understand what you've done?" I says, "Yes." He says, "You've exposed the entire fraud of the court system, that they don't have the authority to drag us into the courtroom because they're operating under foreign state." I says, "Well, yeah, but I also found a cure for this." He says, "What's that?" So I proceeded to explain the federal funding fraud under the Highway Safety Act, and the federal funding says, "My God," he says, "you're now exposing the federal funding fraud on these people." I said, "Well, yes, it isn't this hard to prove their corruption." He says, "You realize you did this in a 4-page document." I says, "Yes, sir." He says, "The problem is 1 page is your court heading and 1 page is your proof of service. That gives you 3 pages. I says, "Yes." He says, 2 pages is definitions of words of a foreign state. I says, "Yeah." He said, "You did this in 1 single page. You exposed the entire corruption in 1-page document." I said, "What's your point?" He says, "Most people take 100 pages to lay out what you laid out in 1. I said, "Well, I don't have to waste paper. That's just a short version of what we're saying." He says, "You're absolutely right." He says, "You've laid out the entire corruption." He says, 99% of the people have to be let out of jail, and 100% of the cases have to be dismissed. It's in court right now because you proved absolute corruption on their side of the fence. And that was a 4-page document that I did in 2008.
And where has it gone since 2008?
Well, it's still going out. It's still being used. Some people, they do honor it. We've got people out of jail with it. But again, it goes back into the judge. If the judge wants to allow it, they do. If they don't, they won't.
If they want to be a hard ass or not.
Yeah.
Or a good person or not.
Yep. But I've gotten kids back with it. We've gotten homes back with it. We've gotten people out of jail with it. You know, it's like anything else. If the judge wants to be honorable, it works. If he doesn't, then it don't. It's like anything else. And that's what really got me thinking hard about what we're dealing with, because I've watched all these different patriot groups come up with all this information, UCC, the private side. Sometimes it works, sometimes it don't. Majority of the time, it don't work. Why don't it? Well, the more I got thinking about it, I started going back in and looking at, okay, what is the common denominator here? And the common denominator is most of the stuff don't work. Why don't it work? Because we got the rule of law, we got the Constitution, we got the federal statutes, we're under commerce, we're under maritime, we're under, admiralty. Why don't it work? Then it finally dawned on me about the Trading with the Enemy Act through some research and some information that we got. So I started going back to look at the Trading with the Enemy Act, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Well, then I watched that Nuremberg with Spencer Tracy that Becky was talking about. When I seen it, it dawned on me they're bringing us in as enemies of the state. You don't have to commit a crime. All they have to do is profile you, and that makes you an enemy of the state. And when I started listening to how they were prosecuting these people, I started looking at what they're doing to us, and it runs right down the line. They're not following any rule of law. They're not following the UCC. They're not following the admiralty side. They're not following the maritime. They have no respect for the private side coming in.
They're protecting the fraud.
Yes, they're protecting the fraud.
Yeah, and one of the things that really struck me about this was understanding where the criminal side of this comes in. Because under the Constitution, if you go in and you study Article 3, then it becomes very, very clear that our Justice Department is very, very limited in what it can do. Very limited. There's just a very, very careful holding in of what the judiciary is allowed to do. And there is no such thing as a criminal side. That criminal side has to have a jury of your peers. There is no jurisdiction under criminal in the Constitution. Well, if you go study and you see Title 28, then all law is civil. There is nothing but civil law. And then you look at it, the criminal statutes come in. The criminal jurisdiction is reserved for future codification. So there is no criminal side in the statutes and codes. But if you go do a traffic ticket, that's a criminal violation. If you go do child support enforcement, that's a criminal violation. If you're doing the foreclosures come under criminal. Where is the jurisdiction? And so this is where we started looking at all of this, and the only place that we can find any kind of criminal jurisdiction in the statutes and codes is in USC 50, the war and, what is it called, Rod? The
War and National Defense.
Yeah, War and National Defense. And so as he began to lay out Chapter 23, or Chapter 3, Section 23,
correct,
and we all started studying the War Powers Act and seeing how the registration and the licensing is bringing us in under that, a light bulb went off. And I'm saying, oh, no, now we're beginning to understand more how this is doing. But until you really get in there and you understand your own laws and, what's supposed to be going on, and then you look at all of the cases that we're all dealing with as we get together in our living rooms on Friday nights, and as we're dealing with foreclosures, the networks that have sprung up all across the country as people join together to help each other deal with this, this is a large network that's really coming to help each other as we're dealing with all of these things, because our properties are getting stolen out from under us. Our fathers are being put in debtor's prison, for Pete's sakes. Well, that was outlawed when the original Constitution was put together. So as we begin to realize all of the things that are going on, as 97% of the cases that go to court get found in favor of the bankers or the state of or the plaintiff, and our people are being jailed more and more and more, then we had to start looking at it and saying, okay, where are the statutes? What jurisdiction are we operating in? And so this is some of the stuff that's really coming out as we're beginning to find that we have to hold them accountable.
But see, this also goes back into the banking regulations. If you get into Title 12, 95, 95A, 95B, you go back and read that. That brings you back up under the state of emergency clause of licensing regulations, which takes you right back over to the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917. So even the banking laws are dragging us into the Trading with the Enemy Act on all this. And this is where the connection starts coming in, because this is one of the things that we brought up in a court case up in Cincinnati, Ohio, is that when we walked in, I tried to come in as the PAG on this for this couple up there, and the judge would not allow me. Well, you didn't file an end of appearance. I said, yes, I did. I went back and showed her the end of appearance. Well, she crapped because she didn't realize that I actually filed one in. Well, they wasn't going to allow me. But the couple brought in Title 12, 95, 95A, 95B, showed that that loan, when it was signed under the state of emergency clause. Well, if it's signed under the state of emergency clause, that means there's no money. And this is what we're tying it back into. This is what I'm sitting here saying. Once you understand that the driver's license, automobile, falls under the Trading with the Enemy Act. All loans fall under the Trading with the Enemy Act. Your children, because the property was given over to the state for collateral, falls under the Trading with the Enemy Act. There isn't anything that we can't trace back to that Trading with the Enemy Act and that Public Law 148 Stat C1 under the state of emergency. And once you learn and understand this connection and how to run it back, now we know why we're being railroaded in these courts. Now we know why the children are being snatched off of the parents. Now we know why our properties are being snatched. We have a better understanding of it now because we can run it back to the foundation of how this thing was set up under the license and registration, of how they put us under to register ourselves and register everything and turn everything over to the government for it to use as collateral for its own purposes. But they were supposed to be discharging and reimbursing us at the end of the war. But the military is not getting a dime out of this. The military is being told, well, we got to cut your budget. We got to cut your budget. You can't cut their budget under a state of emergency. And that's exactly what they're doing. And nobody's bringing this up.
Incredible information. We have an opportunity. We want to bring Jennifer Williams. Jennifer, come on in.
Thanks, Andrew. I have been aware of the concept of sovereignty most of my life, and I actually am privileged to be on the call tonight because of a circumstance that happened to me a couple of weeks ago, in that I appeared in one of our municipal courts where I live in Birmingham, Alabama, and in an attempt to establish jurisdiction outside of the court itself, within my own sovereignty, I was thwarted by the corrupt alleged judge and was found in criminal contempt of court before a trial could even begin for objecting to her railroading me into her jurisdiction. And I was subsequently then jailed for 3 days with no other recourse but to accept this physical kidnapping that occurred of my body. And so I'm here tonight to try and tell my story and to make as many people aware of the level of the police state that we live in, and the corruption, and the information that we've been discussing tonight seems to have really congealed for most of us, even in the last 48 to 72 hours, recognizing fully the concept that we're all being tried as enemies of the state, that, in fact, our country has been in a state of emergency since at least 1917, and we've been in perpetual war so that we could be then considered enemies of the state and be tried for war crimes. It's absolutely absurd, and I'm doing what I can to draw attention to it. Hopefully, with a case as absurd as mine, more light can just be shined in all of the dark recesses of these places, so that we can begin to hold the individuals that are doing this in these court situations accountable, demanding their oath and bond, demanding that they prove who they are. But it will take us learning the procedures of the courtroom and learning where these statutes have been broken and just what exactly does it mean to be an enemy of the state. And so I'm happy to be on this call tonight with everybody who can join with me and join with everyone else. I went to jail for 3 days, and I was in Birmingham, Alabama jail, which ironically is the same jail that Dr. Martin Luther King was in 51 years ago for essentially the same issues. He asked, he said, it's a moral obligation for a person to disobey an unjust law. And I see that very clearly. I cannot sit here and continue to pay money into a corrupt system that's robbing my brothers and sisters blind, taking everything that they ever thought that they owned. And least of all is their property. Most of all is their dignity and their freedom. It's gotten to a point that if we don't start seriously moving towards creating a tribunal and beginning to seriously look at these things as a collective community, then we get what we deserve. And, I really want to see everybody stand up together and do something to move this thing forward and expose the fraud. So thank you all for being here and listening.
And that's why I've taken my galactic historian side, the New Earth Nation Project, Rod Class, Jennifer Williams, OPP, and brought them all into one big mega call. This call isn't about spirituality. It's about us here in the now, in the I am presence that's saying enough is enough. It's time to educate ourselves, share this knowledge and education, and come together on TalkShoe, come together on AIB Radio, come together on Galactic Historian, come together in what is the common language of working together. Right now, it's working with this administrative understanding so that an International Tribunal of Natural Justice can begin to be formed so that whistleblowers can come forward and expose the rest of the fraud. Rod was talking earlier about his paperwork, and that first page he exposed all the fraud. Mm-hmm. Well, people need to begin digesting that first page and digesting and understand, what if Rod had page 2, page 3, page 4? What else is he going to expose? We all know that this fraud is at the highest levels, or those that are on this call. There isn't a spot that this fraud doesn't cover in this whole world. It's a global fraud. 253 corporate nations, all essentially doing the same thing with their own cultural differences or their own locality differences. But here, in the now, right, all these beings on this call, we've come together with our purpose. We've come together with our unity. We've come together with this heart space to say, it's time to share. And share at the highest levels, beyond what the reach of this radio station is. We all need to reach into our minds of sweat equity and wonder, can I share this an extra way? Can I go and pick up a book on equity? Can I go and read Rod's documents? Can I go and watch the videos on Jennifer? You can do all of that. I would hope you do it with a smile on your face, even when the information gets tough, because you are then alchemizing the negativity of what they're projecting on you and turning it back against them. Because that's what we need to do. Turn it back. What they're saying to use against us, we can use against them in the administrative. For those people that don't want to do paperwork, you can support the other people that are doing the paperwork, because it takes a tremendous amount of time, effort, energy, and spirit to stay in that. Because they're constantly trying to beat down our spirit.
Okay, here I am, Joe Barton's campaign manager, and we are so grateful because it was a successful campaign. Joe's running for a seat on the park bench. It's a funny, humorous, light thing, but it's also very serious because we're talking about the public's right of way, and we're talking about free speech and access to what's called the commons. There are certain resources that all civilizations recognize have to be kept open to the common person, because that's where you get the healthiest and most robust innovation, creativity. At the beginning of the internet, open source software was all about sharing. Somebody would work on something and then they would present it to the community. Somebody else would pick up on it, tweak it, change it a little bit, throw that out again. And as a result of this open source, the intellectual property would grow and grow and grow. Unfortunately, there's bullies that come along, and these have been recognized throughout the ages, and that's why throughout the ages you have recognized remedies for controlling this rampant theft and bullying, where people just take what they want because they want it when they want it. Now, just because we're sort of dazzled by the new technology of the internet does not mean that despite the new technology, it's not the same old story. And the same old story is that temptation to steal and to take that which isn't yours. Now, what could be a healthier and more effective way of ensuring due process and ensuring integrity and honorableness among the community than to spread that word? If there's some business that's doing a really good job taking care of its customers, honoring its contracts, standing behind the products when they don't work, when that word goes around, that's the product that gets the good buzz. People want to avail themselves of a good product. Look at today at what's happening. I brought in a Panasonic camera, and I mean, I didn't think I was that old that you'd have to remember it practically in remote history where customer was king. But in all of Manhattan yesterday, I couldn't find one Panasonic repairman that could make the port in my mic pickup work. I had to call Panasonic. I had to talk to their customer relations for almost an hour. And all that I got was a telephone number or an address of some PR agency called Customer Affairs Department, you know, that's an agency within that corporation itself. So, you know, what are the chances that's going to really be a robust watchdog? It's like zip chances. And then eventually the camera has to be sent off to a place in Texas, and then of course you're billed for this because they're making a new contract, and with the new contract, the money symbolizes new consideration. So that means that the responsibility that the corporation, in this case Panasonic, had to turn out a good product to the people, there's no oversight. And so what we're seeing, because of lack of free speech, because of people not really understanding the power that cable public access has had in the past, and that potential that you would have courageous producers that would come in front of the camera and start to talk about issues that maybe other people were a little reticent to talk about, or maybe because of the uncomfortableness of it, they would say, get a lawyer to deal with. You used to hear that expression, you'll be hearing from my lawyer. Really, in truth, you're the more valuable voice, not your lawyers. Your lawyer belongs to a club. It's called the American Bar. The American Bar is a communist organization, really and truly. You can look up at the Freedom First Party website. We did interviews with Rod Class. where he put up on the screen the actual congressional records showing this. What this means is that it goes by a code of ethics, the same code of ethics as the Communist Party. It doesn't go by due process. Due process reflects more the tendency in nature that whenever there's an imbalance, balance is near at hand, so that the remedy is near at hand. And that's what you want to bring out. So now I'm joined by Joe. I just thought I'd rap a little bit while you were gone.
Oh, that's good. That's good, because I thought of something
As a
else.
campaign manager, yeah.
My campaign manager and the love of my life. And I thought of something else. We had Giuliani, who started this homeless problem that we have in New York. And then we had Bloomberg. Now we got 60,000 homeless people living on the streets in New York, eating at the food kitchens. And most of this is happening because of the criminal courts, the landlord-tenant courts, and the criminal justice system that's creating this problem. Now we have de Blasio, I actually believe de Blasio is trying to do the right thing. So I'm sending a call out to you, Mayor de Blasio. I want you to look into landlord-tenant court and look into the corruption there. The landlord-tenant court always rules for the money people, for the landlords.
Not necessarily a landlord, like Louis Kim. But the money people.
The money people. And the banks. Louis Kim was an exception. 90% of the cases, or probably 95% of the cases, the landlord-tenant court rule for the landlord. They rule for the banks. And when judges turn around and ignore a pro se litigant's papers because they didn't have a lawyer, like in our case, the judge said our paperwork had no merit. That's just like, I'm not even going to pay attention to what you say. I'm going to give it to the other side. Even when we pointed out, Mayor de Blasio, when we pointed out that non-judicial foreclosures are illegal and the other side's paperwork was generated from a non-judicial foreclosure. Judge Ann Katz, who's a criminal, sitting on the bench, said our paperwork had no merit, and she chose to hear forged documents and to give the ruling to the people who forged those documents. You know, and what they did was she said, oh, well, your lease was canceled, but our lease was canceled fraudulently. Our stock certificate, Paula had a stock certificate, they just wrote void on it and then made a new one for themselves, and Ann Katz accepted it. Even after we told her all of this was generated from a non-judicial foreclosure. So, Mayor de Blasio, we really need you to take a stand for the homeless people in this city and straighten out the landlord-tenant courts so that they stop creating more and more homeless people and taking more and more apartments from people, more and more co-ops from people. I think, Mr. de Blasio, you are trying. You're better than Bloomberg. You're better than, who was that before?
Giuliani.
Better than Giuliani. Now it's time for you to really step up to the plate and become an active mayor, straightening out the problems that the city has created. Landlord-tenant court is a corrupt from top to bottom. We went to to Ann Katz and
supervising judge.
The supervising judge, and he
says he can't do anything.
Says he can't do anything. Well, why is he a supervising judge if he can't straighten out the errors by a lower court judge and refuses to get involved? And his name's Kaplan, right?
David Kaplan.
David Kaplan. You should.
I mean, he seems like a nice enough guy, and he wrote a really nice letter. But it just, you know, when you look at it, it just smacks of all that PR agency stuff. It doesn't really smack of law. Law means that you're notifying a responsible, concerned elder or, you know, a great person, you know, honorable person. You're notifying them of felonies, of treasonous behavior. This is something that such a person should welcome knowing about, because that's why they're in those positions, to make sure that due process is given to the people and equal protection is given, not that this person gets the law ruled in their way and that person in the other way. Part of the problem in New York isn't just New York City, it's this federal funding, because New York City has an inventory of 190,000 empty apartments. So why, if there's 190,000 empty apartments, is there so much pressure to keep evicting? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because of the federal funding. And that's why you have to start really studying deeply where our financial blueprint came from with the Federal Reserve in 1913. Federal funding is bringing $3,500 a month to the shelter lords. So they're getting much more money by bringing in homeless people who have federal funding attached to their accounts that these homeless people don't even know that they have. And again, that's something that we can use public access for, is to educate ourselves so that the common people are not so ignorant. And then I think the judges will hold us in higher regard, that we're not just mindless corporations. Residence means it's a place where a corporation lives, or that we're chattel, because if you look at a lot of the UCC laws that they're citing to justify the consequence of a non-judicial illegal in New York foreclosure, they're using laws that if you actually read the laws, you are not a flesh and blood living soul. You are chattel and you are cargo. Now, chattel and cargo cannot sign a signature, make a contract, take on a debt. So it's got to be one way or the other. Either you are a slave and then you get to know who your master is, and the master is responsible for taking care of you, or if you're a free person, then you most certainly have the right to face your accuser. And all of these laws for fair debt and lending and disclosure, it's all about that old adage, you have a right to face your accuser. Our accuser, Louis Assarino, never showed up in court for us. And even when the judge cited that summary judgment was requested orally, it wasn't requested orally by Louis Assarino, who was not there for cross-examination or to ask questions, obviously piercing questions about a non-judicial illegal in New York foreclosure. No, he was represented by his attorney, who only has it hearsay. Jennifer Eckert was not in my apartment when my locks were changed in 2004. She was not in my apartment when my stock certificate was taken in 2004. So this expired lease that was cited yesterday in the letter that we got from Judge Katz as a justification for us not having a right to a jury trial, because there's this clause in co-op leases that you waive your rights for a jury trial. So there are two hugely important rights. The right to a trial by a jury of your peers, not the peers of bankers or special interests.
And not judges that are catering to special interests, to banks, to rich landlords, to powerful law firms.
That you can't even face, because they don't put motions in. That's why your ability to face your accuser's not there, and your ability to have a trial by a jury of your peers. This is hugely important.
So again, we're calling out to you, Mayor Blasio, who we believe is trying to do the right thing, and we're letting you know of the criminality in landlord-tenant court. Now we want to know, Mayor de Blasio, what are you going to do about it? This is harming the citizens of New York City, and you're the mayor, and you should do something about the corporate council, which controls these all these landlord-tenant courts, and it's about control for the powerful real estate people, like the Trumps of the world. That's what the Corporation Council and all these courts are set up to protect their interests, not to protect the people of New York. And you were elected mayor by the people of New York, and it's your responsibility, Mayor de Blasio, to fix the criminality in landlord-tenant court that was helped along by Giuliani and Bloomberg. Now, you've said you're different and you're a man of the people, so we expect you to look into landlord-tenant court and look into the criminality in landlord-tenant court, that the judges there, Judge Hahn, Judge Katz, and probably most of the other judges there are there specifically to protect the interests of the wealthy and step all over the rights of the people of New York. So Mayor de Blasio, we really would like to hear from you, and I welcome you to come on my show and talk with me about these issues, or on Paula's show. If you don't want to be on Pot Talk, if you think that's a little bit too out there, you could go on Paula's show further down the rabbit hole, which is less threatening to people, and she will talk with you about and explain to you and ask you questions about why landlord-tenant court is doing the things that it's doing, why it's denying due process, why it ignores pro se paperwork or dismisses it and says it has no merit. I've done a lot of law. I've studied law. You know, I'm not a lawyer, but I've beaten lawyers in court, and I know a lot of law. And when a judge says to me, your paperwork has no merit, I'm not just a stupid person who just turned in a paper. I checked it all out. I used legal law sites. I knew what I was doing. This judge just turned around and said, your paperwork has no merit, when I'm telling her non-judicial foreclosures are illegal in New York, and she knows it. And the paperwork that Louis Assarino brought before her was generated from a non-judicial foreclosure. She tells me, I can't hear your argument on non-judicial foreclosure, but I can hear his argument on the paperwork generated from the non-judicial foreclosure. So this judge is denying me due process, me and Paula, due process, violating our rights by just dismissing our paperwork like it's nothing, and giving everything, showing clear bias by giving every ruling to the criminals who have perpetrated this fraud upon me and Paula.
You can also see a lot of evidence that they want to not be culpable for this. Like Joe was talking about the importance of getting a lot on the record so that when an appeal comes, you can't add any new things to it, but everything that was brought up should be addressed. And you'll see the fact that Louis Assarino never showed up in court. I believe that some of the mentors of Jennifer Eckert would meet her in the hallway, but they'd never actually go into the courtroom, because if that really is a crime scene, that's really what's going on. So when you're going in there and you're saying, under Title 18, misprision of treason, when you've announced a felony, what you're doing is you're announcing that there's crimes there, and everybody really should freeze in the room, everybody who's there, because you're trying to ascertain who are the actors who are trying to pull off knowingly, willingly, and intentionally misusing the public's good faith and trust that they're dealing with honorable government servants who've taken oaths of offices and who have bonds. But if you ask for these, they're not forthcoming. Then you have to contract with another agency, give a little bit of money, and again, money is a way of sealing the deal and giving consideration. So you're constantly in a process of recontracting. And that's why, in court, you'd probably be pretty safe to say anytime a judge is talking to you, to just say, are you trying to contract with me? And if so, I demand full disclosure. That way you can find out why the rulings are not impartial, why they would stick their neck way, way out on the side of criminality and not take, the path of least resistance. A judge is just supposed to sit there and not say much at all. A judge isn't supposed to be prosecuting the case. They're supposed to be neutral parties. So the only reason I could think that they could possibly stretch to say our paperwork had no merit is that if we're saying that the court has no jurisdiction, because jurisdiction is established by a harmed party, and a harmed party has to bring in evidence of the harm, that money was taken, and because of this money being taken, that party is wounded and needs to be made whole. So if you don't bring in the evidence of the harm, what you're saying is, without a harmed party, how do you establish jurisdiction? So if we were asking for a ruling from a court that we were claiming had no jurisdiction, that might be a reason that they said that our paperwork had no merit, but then you've got to come out and be clear about it, because the reason we had to keep putting in paperwork and the reason we showed up in the first place is under threat of homelessness, is under threat of eviction, which is it's a terrifying fear to live with when you don't know about due process. Today, I went down and just tried to find my file. I go up to the court's clerk, the judge's clerk, and she said she brought it down on Friday. Today is Wednesday. I go down there, they look around. This is the second pass, because I went there at 9 o'clock before the judges opened for business at 9:30, and they couldn't find it once. I went back, they couldn't find it twice. I went back and forth. Finally, the judge's clerk, I think her name is Julia, Judge Ann Katz's clerk, had to come down herself, and she sort of huffed around for a while and said that she brought it on Friday. I wasn't supposed to be on that side of the glass, you know, at room 225 in Housing Court, for those of you who've been down there. The second floor is where all the clerks are, and believe me, the majority of people are wonderful. They're honorable. They want to do the right thing. They want to work for bosses that are going by due process.
On this side,
they couldn't find my paperwork.
On this I disagree with Paula. A lot of the clerks there, we've tried to put in paperwork, and they tried to stop us from putting our paperwork in, saying it's not right, it's not right. And we knew it was right, and we had what was the head clerk come out, and the head clerk looked at our paperwork and said, okay, it's all right, and made them put it in. But the initial clerk tried to stop us from getting our paperwork in. And the clerks there do stifle pro se litigants. They try to say, and the Supreme Court rulings that say a pro se litigant's paperwork should be liberally construed and should not be held to the same standards as a lawyer. Yet the clerks there try to hold pro se litigants to the standard, and it should not be the clerk's job. It's not the clerk's job to read the paperwork. It's the clerk's job to take the paperwork, make sure that it's going to the right court, the right time is on it. The front page is what the clerk should look at, not go through your documents and see what you're saying.
Like if they see the word fraud,
right,
then they're told they can't take it.
Right. Mm-hmm. If they see the word fraud, they don't want to take it because, you know, you're claiming fraud against a bank or a landlord who are committing fraud, and the clerks don't want to take it. The clerk should take any paperwork that people put in. That's what they're there for. They're not there to read over the paperwork and reject stuff, which they do.
It's document tampering. It's a high crime, and the clerk's office knows it. That's why I'm saying even today, after, you know, well after an hour and going on 2 hours, I went outside to see Joe, who was having a cigarette outside, and then I came back in again, and probably 2 hours had passed, and still my file was missing. And when I went upstairs, you know, the judge's clerk said, well, tell them it's a big file. So you'd think if it was a big file, it would be
easily found,
more easily found, but no file is forthcoming. And this makes one really nervous, and they could see a lot of the good clerks there. I do know that, I mean, they avoid problems. If they see me coming in, some of them will go away because they don't want to get in trouble, because they're told to do things that they know is not right and they know is rights violating of the person coming before them. But eventually I get clerks that I can see are very concerned citizens. They're very concerned, like I said, if we had an eviction, it indicated in the judge's decision, even though I didn't see the order, that as soon as a warrant was written, that there would be 30 days for us to voluntarily leave 26 Gramercy Park. However, I wanted to see my original file to see if I could see this warrant, because I figure under Freedom of Information, you should be able to see all paperwork that's generated on your behalf. Well, I was told that you can only see a receipt of a warrant, but there wasn't even a receipt of the warrant in there, because they looked me up on the computer because I was going to heed Lydia Radin's very experienced and wise advice, which is go directly to the marshals and say there's a lot of funny business going on with this case, and until the appeal is over, you're going to be culpable if you get involved with evicting innocent people. So I do believe that the problem can seem overwhelming, the problems that perhaps judges are saying, well, people are so ignorant and they've been so dumbed down over decades of inferior education and media that they don't have the capacity to merit due process. But I feel this is
That's
wrong
bullshit.
because what this does is this starts to foster more and more what I call bottom feeders. The fraud starts to go to more and more levels, which means pretty soon you have a fantasy economy. If you've got $1 million of federal credit coming in for each U.S. birth certified person.
Let's not go there, because most people don't know about that.
What I'm trying to say is the fraud prevents honest business, honest commerce from taking place. It's not that stop shopping is a good thing, oh, we're shopping too much. It's where the energy is going and what is being created in the community. If you can't get a rent at a decent price, how can you have a restaurant serve food at a decent price? That's what I mean.
Right.
About fraud.
But again, we call out to you, Mayor de Blasio. I actually believe that you're a good mayor, that you're better than Giuliani ever was, or better than Bloomberg was, and you're trying to do the right thing. We're calling out to you to look into landlord-tenant court and straighten out the corruption there, and get these judges off the bench that rule always for the landlord or the bank, then that don't give due process to the average person that walks in there. We have 60,000 homeless people on the streets of New York, and a lot of that was created by landlord-tenant courts.
And 190,000 empty apartments. I always say that at the same time.
Right, and we have I heard 180,000 homeless empty apartments. And the rents in New York City are so high, we really need some kind of legislation to say landlords cannot keep knocking rents up to where the people of New York, only the rich can afford it. And we have empty apartments sitting, and they only sit because they want to keep the rents high. If those apartments were all of a sudden reasonable rents and people could get in them, then it would make some of the other landlords have to bring their price down because there's competition. But if you got 180,000 apartments that are not being occupied just to keep the rents high and keep a shortage of rents so that the rents can stay high, then there's something wrong with that. And Mayor de Blasio, we really want you to do something about it. You're welcome to come on my show, and if you don't want to be on the Pot Talk show, please come on Paula's show and address the issues that we've been talking about.
And please, MNN, let me go live again. Let me go live again, because what Joe has just brought out is this question of why are the rents so high, both commercial and residential. It's not just people ganging up behind the scenes and saying, let's put a fix on it.
It is.
It's that, well, when you have fraudulent money coming in, you've got this fantasy economy, it's practically impossible to compete with a dream and a fantasy. And that's why the rents keep going up higher and higher, because people are living in, they talk about the bubble bursting.
Right.
It's a bubble. It's not robust. But the people of New York are real. They're flesh and blood living souls. They have to live somewhere. A corporation doesn't have to put its feet down, it doesn't have feet onto land. That's why when they say the law of the land is different than the law of the sea or commerce. Generally when you're in a boat, you're going from one port to another, from one, earthbound place to another. And in that time of commerce, you have a slightly different law. But even in merchant law and contract law, even within that jurisdiction, there are rules and regulations of due process. My point is, Let public access roll. Let free speech roll. Allow people to think. These problems are not just problems of New York. If you're going to have syndicated shows, let the shows organic.
So that we are slaves to a society that simply says yes, 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 yes. Now we say no, 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 no. We work together.
Well, this is it. This is one of the things that we've tried on our show, and I have run into some resistance. We don't need to know their laws. That isn't our job. That's for them. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know their job description, you don't know their rules, you don't know their regulations, then you don't know what they're doing wrong and how they're doing it wrong. And that's the whole purpose of us doing it. We're not saying that the laws apply to us. We're sitting down saying it's their job description. And it's up for us to walk in and hammer them on not doing their job right, point out their errors, point out their screw-ups. And it's like Dwight, my brother, that one day, he had a county judge call the house and wanted to know where he was at. And Dwight flat out told him, he says, I was in the federal court bringing felony charges against you because your felony's a lot higher than my misdemeanor. Pissed this judge right off. But you know what?